Hi, I'm Drew, and I'm an amateur model builder. I'm building a layout in my basement called the White River Line, inspired by the Frisco Railroad in the Ozarks. After spending well over a month finishing up the coaling tower, I'm eager to get back into some track work. I've actually got track work planned for next several videos as I work on it over the next few months. But I'm going to start here at the workbench and build a double crossover. My friend Bob from the Frisco forums was generous enough to lend me 2 crossover jigs from Fast Tracks. And I think this is actually going to speed up some of the work that I'm going to be doing on the crossover. So let's jump on into it. Before getting started, I read through all the instructions. This is essentially 4 turnouts in one and a diamond crossing, so it's a bit more complicated than the other turnouts I've built. I printed out some templates from the Fast Track site to use as a guide. The instructions tell you to build each side of the crossover separately and then solder them together. But since I've got 2 jigs, I'm going to try to build this as one piece. I wanted to make sure butting up these 2 jigs together was going to give me the right geometry before I started building. It should work. Just like all the other turnouts I've built, I started by making guardrails. I set these aside for now. They will be the last pieces I install. Next, I prepped all the PC board ties that the rails will be soldered to. Using my template as a guide, I marked all the gaps for the ties using my scribe. The gaps are necessary to electrically isolate the rails from each other. Next, I need to build frog points for the center of the crossover. I've got quite a bit of scrap left from other builds that I can use here. There's a special point forming tool from Fast Track specifically for crossovers. The angles for the frogs for the crossovers are greater than a simple switch. I use the slots marked crossing on the tool. One side of these frog rails needs to be clipped precisely at a registration point on the jig, where it will butt up to the straight route switch point. The other side is angled into a wing that acts as a guardrail. Next, I built a couple of frog points for the center. Once soldered, I clipped and filed these rails to the edge of the jig. Next were these rails that are analogous to a stock rail on a switch. Here on the crossover they form a frog point. I didn't have enough long pieces in my scrap pile for these rails, so I had to grab some new pieces. I cleaned them up with a paper towel. Because these are stock rails in addition to the frog point angles, a portion of the base must be removed to accept the switch points. I marked it using the jig as a guide and used the Fast Track stock aid tool to file away this portion of the base. Next I placed the rails back into the jig and soldered them. Now, the instructions call for adding the outside stock rails. However, since I'm building this crossover in one piece, if I install these rails now, I won't be able to pull the jig apart to install these points. They need to be installed, clipped, and filed. I clipped 8 bits of rail from my pile of scrap. To get this angle right, I need to use the frog slots in the point form. These rails are a bit too short to fit in the tool, so I used an extra bit of rail to properly position them. Rather than soldering the points in the jig, this time I used the frog helper. I noticed as I soldered the last point I was accidentally using the number 5 slots instead of the number 6, but that shouldn't really be a problem. Next I placed them in the crossover jig and soldered them in place. Then I clipped and filed the ends flush to the jig. Now I'm ready to add the outside stock rails. I had to grab some of my 36-inch stock. Since the switch is almost 20 inches, my 18-inch stock won't do. I clipped 4 pieces to the correct length. Of course, then I realized I only needed 2 pieces. Oh well. These pieces should be pretty easy. I just need to remove the base of the rail and solder them into place. I don't know that it's strictly speaking necessary to test the gauge here, but I wanted to make sure that butted joints are pretty smooth. Plus, it's pretty fun rolling this wheel set along the tracks. Now I'm ready to fabricate the last bits of rail, the switch points. I'll need 8 of them. Once filed, finishing the straight switch points was, well, straightforward. Mark and clip to length, and then file the ends to fine-tune the length and to get rid of any burrs. The diverging route took a little more work. I put the proper curve in them. Then I marked the rail and filed a bit of the base to make the bend for the wing. Then marked and clipped to size and filed a slight profile to ease the route for the wheels. Now they are ready to solder into place. Next, I soldered the diverging route switch to the throw bar. I used a small strip of paper to ensure the solder didn't flow into the stock rail and lock the point to it. Now I was ready to pull the crossover from the jig and finish up my soldering. I took a minute to double check my solder joints and did find one that was loose. Rather than putting it back in the jig, I used a couple of 3-point track gauges and reflowed the solder to fix it. Wait, I forgot the guardrails. Well, back into the jig. Now I can finally pull the piece from the jig. I soldered a PC board tie in the center where the diamond crossing converges. I also flipped the piece over to solder some of these frog points that I couldn't quite get to while it was in the jig. I'm always a little concerned when I do this that the iron will melt the solder in these points and they'll pop apart, but I really haven't had that problem yet. And now, one last bit of soldering as I attach the switch points for the straight route to the throw bar. I took a little bit of time to file the points to make sure there's a smooth transition. And now I'm ready to attach the ties. For this, I use Plyobond. This is a contact cement, so it's applied to both the rails and the ties. I use the soldering iron to apply a little heat to a few of the ties to vulcanize the contact cement and to speed up the curing process. However, I am going to let it sit overnight before I remove the excess from the laser cut ties. There is a little more work to do here. I need to cut some gaps in the rails to electrically isolate the frog points, and I'll be adding an over-center spring for manual control of the switch, for now, and I'll need to trim the rails, paint and stain the ties, and pre-drill some holes for installation. But I'm done for now. Thanks for joining me for this episode. You can find me on Instagram and Facebook, and those links are in the description below, along with a list of tools and supplies I use. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave me a like below. It's the best way you can support my channel, along with subscribing. As I mentioned last time, I have an Amazon wish list too, and you can find that link below as well. For the next episode, I'll continue with trackwork, although I haven't decided what just yet. I might build some more switches, or I might finalize my design for the peninsula. Either way, please join me again next time as I continue modeling the White River Line.